I'm Detective Sebastian Castellanos of the Krimson City Police Department. If you've read the reports, you think you know what happened at Beacon Mental Hospital. I'm telling you now, the reports are polite fiction. The truth feels like waking up inside a fire alarm that never shuts off, like your bones are hollow and full of bees. I'll keep it simple, I'll keep it honest, and I'll keep it in order, the way you asked. It started with a call. Dispatch said shots fired at Beacon, multiple fatalities. The tone in the operator's voice wasn't routine. It was thin and metallic, like her mouth was full of cold pennies. I was with my partner, Joseph Oda. Solid cop, cool head. We picked up Detective Julie Kidman, transfer, quiet, reading more than she talked, and we ran the lights. Krimson City had that wet asphalt glare, the kind that turns red and blue into long ribbons. The closer we got to Beacon, the wronger it felt. The hospital sits like a white crown on the hill. That day, it looked like a pulled tooth. We rolled up, killed the siren, and the world got small and slow. The lobby doors stood open. No alarms, no screaming, just the smell. Blood, but not the fresh iron of a fight that just ended. This was older, seeping, like the building itself was bleeding and didn't know it yet. We moved in. Stay sharp, I told them. Joseph had his pistol low, Kidman slightly behind, eyes taking in everything. Bodies lay scattered like dropped coats, patients, orderlies, cops who'd beaten us here. I checked pulses like a reflex, even when I knew it was pointless. Cold skin, empty stares. I told the dispatcher we needed backup and medical. She said we were the first units on scene. That was a lie. The uniforms on the floor were proof. The security room had footage. Grainy, gray, the kind of camera angle that makes you feel like you're trespassing. We watched a group of officers push toward the main ward. Then something ripped through them. A blur in a white hood. It moved wrong, gliding more than walking, there and not there. Men flew like paper, throats opening without hands. The last frame was a pale face turning toward the camera. Then static. I reached for the keyboard to rewind. Something tapped my shoulder. I turned, and the white-hooded man, boy, really once you saw the face, stood right there, close enough to count the old scars across his mouth. He didn't move, but the room did. The camera feed, the fluorescent hum, Joseph's breath, all of it stretched and snapped like rubber. Then black. When I came to, I wasn't in Beacon anymore. Not the Beacon I knew. I was hanging upside down in a basement that looked like a butcher's bad dream. Meat hooks, chains, dripping. A man in a stained apron moved through the room with a cleaver big enough to make its own weather. The sadist, later I'd call him that, because you have to name monsters if you want to pretend you can fight them. I swung for a loose knife stuck into a corpse and cut myself free, hit the ground hard, ankle screaming, head full of echo. He saw me. I ran. The basement was a maze of wet concrete and rotating blades. I could feel the cleaver's breeze at my back. I shoved through a door and into a shaft full of bodies. Slid. Hit metal. The world turned red. I don't remember every step of that escape. I remember the sounds. Distant machine, my own breath punching in my ears. When I burst into daylight, the sky looked fake, too flat, too white. I limped toward a gate that shouldn't have been there, and the ground answered with the grind of gears waking. I found an elevator, an ambulance, a driver. We barreled down Beacon's Hill, city sprawled below. Then Krimson City began to fold. Streets buckled like carpet kicked from underneath. Buildings slid into seams that weren't there a second before. The ambulance tried to jump a tearing street and didn't make it. We went end over end, silence. Then water. I clawed upward through dark runoff and came up coughing in a city I knew and didn't. From there, it was a march through places that wore the right clothes and the wrong skin. Alleys that doubled back on themselves. Subways where the lights came on only when something else moved in the opposite darkness. A village that smelled like smoke and old wood, like it had been built yesterday from memory and rot. Every time I found a door, a mirror, a hallway that looked too clean, I'd feel my head pull sideways, and I'd snap into a place that called itself safe, the ward with the white tiles, a nurse's station, a bell that rang without a hand. The nurse was Tatiana Gutierrez. Calm as a chess player, she'd smile, hand me a form, guide me to a chair that hummed like a hive. Upgrades, she called what happened in that chair. It felt like picking glass out of the meat behind my eyes and slotting in screws instead. Detective, she'd say, try to relax. No one relaxes with a key turning somewhere inside their skull. I wasn't alone out there. I found Dr. Marcelo Jimenez, Beacon's head physician, the kind of man who wears authority like cologne. Always slightly ahead, always knowing just enough to be useful and just little enough to be safe. And I kept running into a kid named Leslie Withers. Pale, stuttering, hands floating like they were catching signals only he could hear. He'd say things before they happened, half sentences that made more sense 5 minutes later. "We must keep going." He'd whisper, and then the floor would break exactly where we'd been standing. Leslie was a compass that spun until you stared at it sideways. Joseph made it back to me too. We'd split in the initial chaos, but good partners not back together. He looked pale, slick with sweat, glasses hanging on by willpower. "I'm fine," he lied, and the sweat on his upper lip said otherwise. Sometimes he'd clutch his head, breathe hard, and I'd see the same blank curtain I'd woken up behind slide across his face. I'd grab his shoulders, shake him back. "Stay with me," I'd say. Sometimes he did. Sometimes something else looked through him, and I had to remind him with more than words. We kept moving because the world didn't let you stop. The city fell away into catacombs that smelled like damp coins and old prayers. In those tunnels I met a man with a safe for a head, the keeper. He walked slow and steady, as patient as rust, resetting his own traps, resetting himself. I'd blow him apart, and he'd pour back out of the neck of that safe like meat and spiders. I learned to hear him before I saw him. The clink of keys on a ring, the soft snick of a tripwire set just so, the rubber-on-stone squeal of a dragged hammer. You start measuring your life in inches when you know a mistake is measured in shrapnel. Then there was Laura. If I close my eyes, I can still hear how she moved. Too many limbs, nails like broken umbrella wires. She hated fire and crawled toward it anyway, screaming with a throat that wasn't built for screaming. Later, I'd learned she had a name before she was a monster. Laura Victoriano, sister to the boy in the hood. She died in a barn fire they set to punish him or to erase him, depending on who you believe. Rage is a kind of fuel. It burned hotter in her than the flames ever did. We'd come across memories like wrong turns, farmhouses that belonged to the Victoriano family, portrait halls, a surgical theater where the air tasted like metal and expensive lies. In those places, the boy wasn't a ghost. He was a man, or the shape of one, called by a name he wore like a dare, Ruvik, Ruben Victoriano. Brilliant, broken, cut open by grief and stitched back together by his own will. He built something under Beacon, metal and algorithm and nerve. A machine called STEM. Here's where I drop the badge talk and say it straight. STEM connects minds. It doesn't care if those minds are ready, willing, or even alive in the way you and I mean it. Plug enough people into it, and you get a mesh, a shared bath. One dominant consciousness can steer the bathwater. Ruvik wanted to be that consciousness. He was that consciousness inside the machine. We were in there with him. The white-hooded figure who pinned me in that security room? That was Ruvik taking an easy step inside the place he built. Jimenez knew more than he first admitted. He'd worked with Ruvik. He respected him, feared him, used him. Pick your order. He said Leslie was compatible, a word that tasted like rubber gloves and betrayal. Compatible meant Leslie's brain could carry Ruvik out of STEM like an ark carries a god statue across a river, if it ever reached a shore. Kidman moved like she carried a second radio only she could hear. She'd vanish when the edges got bent, reappear with new instructions written behind her eyes. Sometimes she helped. Sometimes she aimed a gun where I couldn't see. She asked too many questions about Leslie and not enough about the things that chewed on our heels. I've seen undercover work. I've done it. She wore it without telling us the department that paid for the suit. Weeks or minutes. Who can tell in a place where clocks lie? We rode a bus through the city with Jimenez at the wheel, Joseph white-knuckling a shotgun, Kidman shouting over the diesel and the way the pavement buckled like a bad dream trying to shed us. A giant, blind butcher thing slammed into the bus. The roof peeled like a sardine tin. We shot, prayed, and kept the wheels pointed at what looked solid. We crashed again. I woke in water again. Crimson City had become a flooded tomb. We picked up pieces. The hospital's interiors kept bleeding into ruined streets, into train yards, into the Victoriano house where the walls held their breath. We followed Leslie because he moved like he had a map in his head. He'd stop, tilt his head, and say something like, "He's here," and we'd feel the temperature drop. Ruvik didn't always show his face. Sometimes he showed you your own. Old cases I thought I'd shrugged off replayed in alleys that weren't there yesterday. I'd smell cigar smoke and hear my daughter's laugh echo down a pipe. Lily, my wife, Myra. If you want to break a man, you don't need to beat him. You just have to point him at the past and tell him to hold still. Ruvik was good at that. In the mansion's basement, because these places always have basements, I found a bank of machines pumping like lungs. Switches hum, lights blink, needles twitch. Notes lay everywhere in a doctor's hand that pretended to be steady. Cortical synchronization, host rejection, dominance hierarchies. Jimenez hovered behind me like a ghost who hadn't decided if he was helpful. "We can shut sections down," he said. "We can limit his reach." I pulled levers because sometimes that's all a detective can do. Turn things off and see what stops screaming. It worked like turning off street lamps. Some corridors got dimmer. Some of Ruvik's toys lost their shine. He didn't like that. He started showing up more directly, not just as a presence that made your teeth ache, but as a figure who could be shot at, even if bullets behaved like suggestions around him. He'd blink in at the end of a hall, and the air would bend, radios would spit, and a heat would boil off the walls without flame. I'd fire. He'd vanish, only to fill the stairwell behind us with a shape that used to be flesh and now was an argument between bone and hate. In the catacombs, Joseph faltered. His hands shook too hard to reload. He bled from the nose, eyes glassy. "Stay with me," I said again, and he said something like, "I can hear him." We took a bad turn, my fault. The keeper boxed us in. Traps peppered the floor like teeth. We were careful, but fear is a hand on your back. You lean. A tripwire sang. The room whooped into a storm of nails and steam. I dragged Joseph behind a pillar, counted beats in the hiss, 1, 2, 3, run. The keeper lumbered through, hammer dragging. I put rounds where a face should be, and he just reset. Head twisted, safe door creaked, and he clicked back to standing like a tape rewinding. I hate that sound more than the cleaver, more than the screams, the sound of something refusing to stay dead. We lost Jimenez in a lab drowned in light. He tried to bargain with a ghost that didn't need what he was selling. I saw a flash, heard a wet slap, and there wasn't a lot left to identify. He'd tell you he died serving science. I'd tell you he died serving himself. After that, Kidman got simpler. She put a gun on Leslie. "He can't leave," she said. "You don't understand what happens if he does." I'd already decided I didn't like being told to shoot kids by people who couldn't say who signed their checks. I stood between them. "Lower the gun," I said. She lowered it. Then the floor decided it was a ceiling again, and we didn't have to solve that argument for a few miles. You learn to live on momentum. In the ruins, I found a sniper rifle on a rooftop, and the skyline of Crimson City crumpled like foil. Mutated things climbed out of floodwater and blinked useless eyes at the gray light. Somewhere far off, sirens wailed on a loop that had never learned to stop. We made for Beacon because sometimes the worst place is the truest. If this was a machine, its heart was where it started. The hospital doors opened for us again. The lobby was the same and wrong in the same ways. Smell of antiseptic over the deeper metal stink. Furniture placed by someone who remembered furniture but not people. We took the back corridors following Leslie's half-muttered directions. This way, lights wrong here. We passed rooms full of bathtubs with headrests and straps. People slept in them, or pretended to. Some breathed. Some were only the idea of bodies, like the machine couldn't be bothered to finish drawing them. I knew one of those tubs would be mine. Ruvik waited in an operating theater like a conductor who'd gotten bored of rehearsal. The room opened into impossible distance, rails hanging over the void, machines crowded up against each other like nervous cattle. He didn't rant. He didn't need to. He looked at Leslie and at me, and then at the long white arm of the stem core stretching like a rib. "This is mine," he said without moving his mouth. That's what I heard anyway. The fight you've read about, the big one, the one the department chalked up with words like hallucination and shared psychosis, happened in a place that didn't have a floor until you decided it did. Ruvik poured himself into a thing bigger than bones, a heap of teeth and limbs that dragged a multi-jointed shadow across a junkyard of metal. I fired until the slide locked and then found more bullets in places where there shouldn't have been bullets. It hit me like a train and I woke up under a different sky, then got up and kept shooting. If that sounds impossible, good. You're learning the rules as I did. At some point, the thing stumbled. At some point, I drove a knife sized like a man's dream through what I decided was its eye. At some point, the world popped like overstretched gum, and I was standing ankle-deep in water in the stem chamber. The sound dropped out, then came back wrong. I was strapped into one of those tubs. Needles had kissed my neck and locked lips. The taste of copper in my mouth said the machine had done worse. Around me, the rest of the participants bobbed in their coffins. Some of them wore what was left of uniforms. Some were missing parts the world needs to walk around. A heap on the floor looked like what was left of Jimenez. I pulled tubes out of my arms, heard wet pops, and felt a white flare behind my eyes. Stood, staggered. You can pretend you're brave until you have to pull your own leash. The stem core sat in the center like a sleeping god with too many cords coming out of it. I followed the thickest cables to a jar, no other word fits. Inside it, a brain, pink-gray, wrinkled, floating. You do this job long enough, you know what a brain should look like. This one looked like it held grudges. I remembered the white hood. I remembered the boy's face. Ruben Victoriano, Ruvik. This was him, the piece of him they'd kept, wired into his own kingdom. I didn't have a warrant. I had a gun. I fired. Glass shattered. Fluid let go in a slosh that sounded almost relieved. The world shuddered like a dying animal. Lights strobed. The smell of hot dust and old blood got thick. I thought, maybe that's it. Maybe the man dies when you finally pull the plug. Then I heard footsteps behind me, bare feet, soft shore. I turned. Leslie stood in the doorway, calm, composed in a way I had never seen him. He walked past me, eyes on some horizon only he could see. And as he stepped by, something in the air flexed. The outline of a hood over his face flickered, and then slid back into his skin like a hand into a pocket. Ruvik, not dead, moved. A mind doesn't need a jar when it finds a body that fits. I reached for him, but my hands didn't work. The room swam. I hit my knees. Leslie didn't hurry. He crossed to the exit, opened it, and walked into sunlight as the alarms forgot their own noise. Tatiana's voice, impossible there, but there, said, "You should leave now, detective." I stood because sometimes it's that or don't. I walked the halls of Beacon past bodies that might have been there all along, past names on clipboards that would match missing persons lists, past a mirror that didn't show me right. I came to the lobby. The big doors were open again. Outside, gray day, cop cars, tape caught in a lazy wind. A few uniforms watched me like I was the only moving thing in an old photograph. I walked down the steps. At the bottom, I stopped. On the sidewalk, a young man with Leslie's shape turned his head just enough. For a second, the hood flickered again. Then he blended into the crowd of a city that pretends not to see. My head rang like it remembered the machine and didn't want to forget. I gripped the rail until the buzzing calmed. Then I let go. Here's the part you probably want explained. The why, the how, the part where I give you names and addresses you can subpoena. I'm a detective. I hate not having answers. But this is what I know. A brilliant boy lost everything and chose to become a storm inside a box. Men who should have known better wired the box to other people and called the result progress. They wore suits and had money and never wondered what happens when the storm learns to travel. A young cop with secrets and orders tried to keep the storm contained by pointing a gun at the one raft that could carry it out. I stopped her because stopping a gun pointed at a kid is a reflex stronger than trusting a voice you can't hear. The raft left the river, and the storm walked on two legs. People will tell you I was confused. That trauma and toxins and lack of sleep made me hallucinate. Those people weren't there. They didn't hear a safe door creak open on a neck. They didn't smell old smoke on a spider thing that hates fire. They didn't wake up to pull needles out of their necks in a room where a brain floated like a king. I see things now sometimes. A figure at the end of a hallway who turns the corner before I can call out. A shadow on a wall that doesn't match the bodies in a room. A hood, white at the edges, that blinks out when I focus. When the headaches come, I shut my eyes and count. 1, 2, 3. run. The ache fades if I pretend I can step into a clean ward with a calm nurse and a chair that hums. But I don't sit down in that chair anymore, even in my head. Joseph, he got out with me. We don't talk about it much. We nod in hallways. He watches me the way I watch him, checking for the curtain. Kidman, she gives statements that sound like she's reading from something I can't see. She still gets phone calls you can't overhear unless you lived inside a machine and learned how to bend the noise. Leslie is gone, or he's everywhere. Some nights, streets sound different, like the city is humming a note it learned in a basement on the hill. I walk past Beacon sometimes. What's left of it? The tape is gone. The big doors are closed again. A wind gusts across the steps and the flag scrapes the pole like a fingernail. You want a warning? Here it is. Don't assume the real world is the floor and the machine is the ceiling. We walked out, yes, but part of us stayed, whatever piece the thing uses to find you when you're too tired to think straight. And Ruvik, he learned to wear a face that doesn't make orderlies scream. He learned patience in there. He had time and hate, and the kind of genius that doesn't need sleep. If I go back to Beacon, it'll be with a can of gasoline and a match big enough to make its own weather. But I don't think it matters what burns anymore. Fire's a comfort. It makes you feel like you can change something by making it ash. We burned Laura, and she only screamed louder. We shattered the jar, and he found a better container. We navigated a maze that only looked like a city and called it escape because the door at the end was open. I sleep sometimes. I wake sweating, heart sprinting, certain I'm still in the tub. I touch the scars on my neck and count. 1, 2, 3. The room stays the room. The ceiling doesn't leak wires. Myra's picture is still face down where I left it because I can't look too long without hearing an old life calling through water. I drink coffee that tastes like pennies and keep showing up at a desk where the paperwork is too clean to be true. The world's a mask. It fits better some days than others. You asked me to keep it matter-of-fact and chronological. Here are the beats, the ones that matter. The call to Beacon, the sadist's basement, the city folding, Tatiana's ward in the chair, Jimenez and Leslie, the keeper's catacombs, Laura's fire and the Victoriano house, the bus and the flood, the mansion's brain and the stem truth, the operating theater and the monster, the jar, the exit, the man who wasn't Leslie walking away into sunlight. That's the story, not clean, not closed, but true as I can make it. If you ever hear a bell ring when there's no bell in the room, don't sit down. Don't look in the mirror too long. Don't trust a door that opens too easily. And if you see a white hood at the corner of your eye, keep walking. Don't follow. Don't blink. Some places keep a piece of you. Beacon took more than that. It gave something back too, a shadow at the edge of things, a hum under the floor, a reminder that the worst prisons don't need bars. They need belief. This is me, on the other side of a door that might not stay closed, saying it out loud so it stops echoing in my head. Maybe speaking drags it further into the light. Maybe it just teaches it your voice. Either way, now you know.